So, feminist theories might be one of my favorite chapters. I love this quote. For years, psychiatric journals have touted the salutary effects of antidepressants by printing before and after pictures showing a woman leaning on a mop, looking despondently at her kitchen floor and happily mopping it after taking her meds. So I love how this theory, these theorists, it was born out of existentialism, kind of follows some of those same guidelines, has a lot of philosophical underpinnings, but but all of the other theories are from white males, and so the feminist theorists really move us toward looking at minority populations, looking at the issues of women, and empowering them. And I love that about this theory. I think that most of you will really like it. It's really born out of the impression of women. When you think about it, it is, you know, a transition into our current time, which is why I like it so much. And hey, maybe even some of you will come up with your own theory or expand on this because it's needed. I love that about our field. That if you are a lifelong learner, this is a field, that will constantly be learning. There'll be new theories, there'll be new um, brain research, there'll be different ways that we help people in the future. And to be a part of that and to be continuously challenged is really exciting part of our career. So in class, we will narrowly do a magazine experiment. And I challenge you to do this at home or this week while you are at the grocery store or just look at some of the magazines. They are better than they were when I first started teaching this class because Me Too had not happened yet. We saw, I'm just recording this morning on Friday, but the debate last night where there was a woman moderator, and lots of things are changing for society now, and we are, more understanding of how we have sexualized women. And so it's really, really important to notice how that might still be happening on the media, commercials, magazines, and just think about what kind of impression does that give us over time. Really, like, how are women versus men portrayed on television, movies, and on magazines. So if you have a chance, you may want to leaf through some of those. I used to bring a stack of magazines in, and we would look through. Ordinarily, also during class, which we can do next week, and I think we did some of this last night. For those of you who tuned in, make sure you watch that lecture before you take your reading quiz. Um, but the history of feminism, we can watch these clips. I also have gender role stereotypes. I think these are things that most of you are already aware of, but sometimes people come into the graduate program and they haven't really thought about it a lot. And so we will watch a little bit of the history of feminism and suffrage. I think a lot of times you don't realize how few rights that women had and even still struggle with. But even, I think we talked about this in one of our classes, it may have been foundations, but in like the late 70s, couldn't get credit and buy a home. I mean, there are things that were not too long ago that women struggled with. And I don't know if I have those dates right, but I know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is one who got us the ability to do that. I did not know that until she died. I listened to something on NPR, but I found that fascinating because even me, I was born in 77, and I have seen um, being treated differently. I've had my own experiences. I can share those in class. Um, so I see a difference now, but I wasn't aware. By the time I got old enough to get a loan and a credit card and all of those things, it was women were doing that for years and women had been working. So I didn't come up in that era. So I was really unaware of that. So I find that fascinating that it was not that long ago. But think about the stereotypes. You guys can go ahead and click these in your browser, but I think what I've discovered is since these aren't playing correctly on here, that I will play them in class. And if you, like I said, you're in class last night, we did Albert Ellis, and we listened to him, and I think it helps you to see the theorist and see kind of what they're talking about, what's backing it up, because he is something else. You won't forget Ellis if you watch him. You won't forget, and it will help you remember it from here on out because he is such a character. Um, so there are lots of gender role stereotypes that we are still considering, and it still occur. And when we get into class, we may do this activity on the whiteboard where we write that out and kind of brainstorm and talk about it. Because I think we'll have maybe have some time to have some fun next week. Yeah. All right, let's talk about these theorists. There are several in your text. Jean Baker Miller, Carolyn Zurbayans, Olivia Espen, Laura Brown, as she might be and Carol Gilligan to me are the most famous. I, those are the ones that I knew about more before I even started teaching. So she is different feminism. And so there are things you need to know about each one of these theorists. And you need to know the theorists, you need to know all of them, and that they are aligned with feminists. And this theory was developed by multiple women, and it challenges the male-oriented view of a mentally healthy individual. So let's go over the theorist. This is a picture of Jean Baker Miller. She grew up during the Depression, and that was a time when women were working to help their family get through a difficult time, whether or not you realize that or not, but society didn't agree with that. Jean got her positive view of women from two nurses she met while visiting a local hospital twice a week. Ironically, I'll just tell a personal story that I think is really cool, and you guys may look back in your family trees as well. I would love for you to really assess your history, your ancestry, because it's important that you know as much as you can about it. But my grandmother, my great grandmother, was in the Depression, and she took in boarders and did laundry to survive because my great grandfather died in the war. Um, and so that's so interestingly enough, all my aunts were extremely strong women. Surprising, right? That I'm the offspring of that, right? But I find that so fascinating to think about how we developed out of women who went against the grain and because of their families, their children, and they worked, even though society frowned upon it. And I guess they would have liked them to just die and not feed their children or lose their children. Or horrific stories about men taking children and putting them in homes and taking them away from the wife when he didn't agree with them, especially with if they were working for women's rights. Um, so Jean Baker Miller, the two women were able to convince the nurses that she was visiting at that hospital twice a week. The two women were able to convince Jean and her mother that she should attend a special women's school. Jean's inspiration came from a book called The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Betty sent a questionnaire to other women in her graduating class, and most women in her class indicated a general unease with their lives. Through her findings in The Feminine Mystique, Friedan hypothesized that women are victims of a false belief system that requires them. And through her findings, she hypothesized that women are victims of a false belief system that requires them to find identity and meaning in their lives through husbands and children. Such a system causes women to completely lose their identity in that of their family. From there, Jean became involved in committees and groups for women, where she was set out to prove that women weren't just men gone wrong. She also began to notice culture's effect on women. She thought the value that society put on being a man had caused women to strive to be more like men. She felt that women were the ones who knew how to make the relationships work, hold the families together, and help them to survive and thrive. She thought that society was telling women that these things are not strengths, only what is expected of women. Thus, women do not recognize these things as strengths. That's research from 1995, so not that long ago. Miller began to realize that women felt that men's developmental models are not quite right for them. So Jean Baker Miller, what an amazing lady. She wrote the book Toward a New Psychology of Women in 1976. And you can look her up, read about her in your book. She's pretty amazing. And then we have Carolyn Zurbayans. There's a picture in your book, but also just wanted you to see her so you wouldn't be bored on this presentation. She is a professor at Cornell, and she got really interested in feminist therapy in her PhD. So some of you are considering that, and maybe really interested in concepts now that you will continue to expand on throughout your educational career and your career. She's very interested on multicultural feminist therapy and exploring the practice of feminist therapy around the world. And she has multiple publications. Here is Olivia Espen. She's originally from Cuba and she went to school in Costa Rica, then at University of Florida. She teaches at San Diego State University, and you may notice that a lot of them are still alive. Everyone's alive but Jean Baker Miller that I know of, I think, when your book was published, but she's clearly still alive. She's working here. She is part of an LGBTQ research consortium. She has done so much work with Latinas and women immigrants and sexuality. And so she's pretty awesome. Um, so she likes to do feminist therapy with women from different cultural backgrounds. And she's done extensive research and teaching. So she has her CV. Dare we look at this? But this is, I'm feeling kind of good. Mine's longer than 9 pages, but yeah, it doesn't look like that. It's pretty concise. Oh, she was a postdoc fellow at Harvard. Wow, pretty. Look at this. Look at her honors. Maybe one day. This is cool. Wow. So she's pretty. I think it's neat to look at someone's CV that this is currently like, look at all the books she's written. So some LGBTQ. She's written many books and is an advocate. So pretty cool. Okay, let's go on to, I think we're going to Laura Brown next. So I just brought you to Laura Brown's page because she's the founding member of the Feminist Therapy Institute. There's a picture of her in your book, and I may pull up one in just a second. Um, she's extremely famous in the feminist therapy world. If you're interested in feminist therapy or you're doing your presentation next week, what a great resource here. It's giving you feminist supervision, cultural competence, psychological trauma. And look at this, we can attend some CEs and workshops and courses with Laura. Wow, I might do that myself. Recorded presentations qualifying for CE credit. I'm loving this. This is awesome. So great. It's neat to be able to study some theorists that are still living, right? That's kind of neat. We could actually maybe see her one day. Wouldn't that be a fun? So that's kind of, you do get starstruck when you see these people, like Corey. You can see him at ACA sometimes, or your textbook authors and other people. So we become real nerdy and excited that we get to see these famous folks in our world. I'm loving that Laura Brown's most recent book was just in 2010 on feminist therapy. She's made so many contributions to the field, and she has really big interest in forensic psychology, feminist or forensic psychology. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds very cool. And we also have Carol Gilligan. Carol Gilligan was influenced by Kohlberg's moral development model, but she took issue with it because it was focused on white wealthy men, and we will talk about this in lifespan development because Kohlberg's study I think was on the white Harvard men, and she took issue with that and came up with difference feminism. And difference feminism is a philosophy that stresses that men and women are different versions of a human being, are different meanings in existence. We worked more toward relationships while men moved toward separations. She came up with a whole model, and she is still alive and is a professor at New York University. And there's all this information about her in this interview here. Um, so that's Carol Gilligan. So this is one of those things where, remember Dr. Beale here, she likes to give you um, little tidbits and nuggets of information in these lectures that will be on your exam. And since she's not in your book, this would be really important to know about Carol Gilligan and also about Sandra Burns. Sandra Burns has passed away, sadly, on May 20th, 2014. She had Alzheimer's. But in her life, she was amazing. She came from a hardworking family that believed in a strong work ethic. Her mom was a secretary and told her daughters from a young age that house chores were no fun and being a housewife was not very desirable. Sandra went to a Jewish academy school where she became aware of gender differences because her school was known for expelling girls who wore pants. You know, when I, never mind. When I read these, I get shocked. So I can't even imagine. Okay. In 1971, Sandra began looking at gender roles and as a result created a measurement which she called the Burns Sex Role Inventory. Her instrument allows individuals to be both feminine and masculine, which we all are, unlike other tests that are restrictive to only one. The inventory includes 20 feminine characteristics, 20 masculine, 20 neutral. The individual rates themselves as possessing the characteristic on a scale of 1 to 7. When average, the median score is 4.5, the normal distribution that we talk about already with sexuality. Anyone above this is seen as possessing feminine or masculine traits. Unlike any other test, the individual may score high on both feminine and masculine because they are scored separately. The androgynous. So the sex roles, redefining sex roles for Sandra Byrne, and um, she made amazing strides in research for sex roles, the lens of gender, sexual inequality. These are some of her research articles: An Unconventional Family, sex bias advertising. Um, so you can see here on her page all the major contributions that Sandra Byrne made. So you make sure that you know about Sandra Byrne as well, please. Feminist counseling was born out of exactly, we're going back on our slides, so I just kind of was giving you nice pictures and more information so you're not bored on the theorists. But feminist counseling was born out of the reason that everything was basically created and studied on white males. I'm not knocking the white males, but that's just the way it was, and that's the transition in our history. And the truth of the matter is that most people in counseling and most counselors are women. So it made sense that this approach started. It is comprised of social, cultural, and political aspects that affect a person's life. An important part of the theory is actually acknowledging the oppression and constraints placed on women and marginalized individuals. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't use it also with a white male. We'll talk about that. I use this constantly. Women come in, I often say, I've got a lot of women whose husbands have had a pretty sordid affair lately, or whatever. That's things are coming to light in the pandemic. And I say, what would have happened if you had done this? Right? Like, what would people say if you were the one, right? As a woman. And so I use feminist. I say that I'm person centered and EMDR, but I use feminist counseling constantly. I am always asking questions and I'm always reminding. I have a lot of clients who have shame because they had sex before marriage or one night stands, and they were coming up in they're in their 40s and 50s and or older, and they've just carried shame their whole life. And I say, look, it's society that put that on you. Don't that there's no reason for you to, society has made you feel such shame for this. I promise your male counterparts don't probably feel as much shame as you do. But I mean, has drastically changed people's lives because they carried such shame because they were so in their wild oats when they were 19. Instead of understanding developmentally that that can happen, and it's okay and it's not the end of the world and it should not make you feel it so ashamed. And so I talk about the way that society has oppressed us, and I get a little excited talking about it, can you tell? um, and people don't often think about that. I'm like, let's go back in our history and talk about what like life was like for women and what you were seeing, like MTV and women in bikinis and dancing on cars. And what message was that sending to you as a girl, as a high schooler, as a college kid? We get that message. My daughter's even, um, she's made a couple comments. I try really hard for her to not feel that it's better than when I was coming up. And a lot of you in this class will probably relate to what I'm saying, and some of you younger even. But then I think about, she'll say something like, well, something about I don't want to look fat. And then I thought, oh my gosh, where is that coming from? I um, it didn't come from me. um, at all. So it was something she picked up on the television or a show or at school. And so like body image stuff is unbelievable how many ways that we see that and we don't even realize it. Okay, soapbox coming down. Okay, there are three waves of feminism, and you have to know this. You need to memorize it. First wave, second wave, third wave. We are going to talk about all of these, but the first wave is 1848 through mid-20s, second wave 1965 to today, third wave current movement led by women. I think there's now a fourth wave. I'm going to do a little bit of digging for this, and we're going to talk about that. So there are three waves of feminism. And that first wave, of course, started really early in 1848 through the mid-1920s. This is before women could vote. They had zero rights in marriage, employment. Um, I have a wonderful YouTube video here that we should watch in class, and it's from the suffragettes. And men could literally take children, could kick them out on the street. They could be homeless. They had no rights. And so this would be the first wave. And the second wave apparently is 1965 to today. I'm going to do a little more research on this. I know last year there were some discrepancies in two of the textbooks, so I'll make sure that I look this up and we talk about it in class. We can definitely have some good discussions, I think, on next week when we get to see each other. I'm looking forward. I really enjoyed getting to see everyone on Thursday, and I think it just goes better when we get to see each other in person. Raised women's consciousness. This is where, equal rights started. If you think back to the 60s, and you can really get a feel for this, from our history that this is what was happening during that time. And women were really moving forward to overcome oppression. And then the third wave, and perhaps fourth wave, that's what we will talk about when we get into class next Thursday, is that current movement led by women. Of course, your textbook was written a couple of years ago, so there have been a lot more outcomes for feminism in the past year and a half to 2 years. But this is the current movement led by women. The main goal is to acknowledge the foundation that has already been laid and address work-life balance, international women's rights, sexual harassment, and including men and boys in the feminist movement. That was one of the things that I really want you to understand, that this is not just for women. This is a way of being, and it is a wonderful theory. This is the backing of it. So it's important that you understand that it's not just for women. It's for everyone who is overcoming anything. It's empowerment, and it's a wave of inclusion, of making sure that we include racial, social, ethnic diversity, that we understand oppression, for all. And there are tons of more notes down here for you. It's also part of fighting for gay and lesbian rights, violence against women, all those things. And then there's the postmodernism and notes down here for all of you. But we're going to talk about this in class, so don't stress too much over this as far as what you need to know for an exam. Let's talk about that in class, okay? I do want you to know the theorist. I do want you to know the definition of feminist counseling, racial cultural theory, relational cultural theory. We'll talk about those waves in class, but let's talk about history and development of this. So obviously the history of feminism is not very long because it's a pretty new development. Started really early, like we talked about, and it's transitioned through several different areas in history. In the 1960s, as a response to the feminist movement, women began to join together, began things like battered women's shelters, rape crisis centers, women's health and reproductive centers. Those are things we didn't have before the 60s. So if you were in an abusive relationship or you were raped, there was really no help for you. Same with child abuse. Department of Family and Children Services was not very prevalent with the exact date of that, but when you have a client who is older and they had abuse or something happened during this time period, it's very important that you understand the historical ramifications of that, and being able to normalize the historical influence on the time of that trauma to normalize it for them, because quite frankly, there really wasn't a lot of things that people could do or places to go for help during that time. Self-help group programs started to become more of a thing, more effective. Consciousness raising groups for female therapists at that time to model therapy under this model rather than traditional therapies. Those consciousness groups were more about empowerment. We learned about the empowerment and foundations and advocacy. In the 1970s, a research on gender bias emerged, which promoted additional feminism movements. Suggested that therapists identify their own personal attributes against gender bias and sexism to understand the various kinds of oppression that may affect their clients. 1980s, feminist therapy finally separated its very own theory. And that's when Gilligan began to participate in the theory, and we learned about her earlier in the lecture. 1990, the therapies became more diverse and focused on specific topics: eating issues, incest, sexual abuse, abusive relationships, body image, things like that. I just really want you guys to understand how new those things are. There has been an issue, but we haven't really started treating them until most recently. Remember, PTSD was not in DSM until 1980. Philosophy, more of an advocate now in the 90s. Therapy goal is to be empowered and equal, understanding the oppression on women and other marginalized populations, understanding patriarchy in our society, being a part of activism, helping transform gender relationships, social institutions, increase women in marginalized populations, determination, help to affect societal change. And women of color often did not believe that white feminists understood their plight because it was very different. It is very different because there's a different level of oppression on women of color, right? So there's more systemic issues. So there were some issues there, and then some issues that lesbian populations had. They viewed oppression as related to sexualized images of women, that emphasized multiple identities, and wanted to recognize diversity among lesbian groups. And so feminist theory is in line a lot with activism for LGBTQ plus rights. Okay. The assumptions associated with feminism is that the theory is just for women, that it excludes men. It's full of man bashing and made up of women who don't shave and wear combat boots. And that's obviously a bias, and some of you may have even had it when you read the term feminist. We do have this bias and stereotype in our minds about what that looks like. In reality, that's not what it is at all. The central constructs is that gender is fair, flexible, multicultural, interactionist, and lifespan-oriented view of human nature. The emphasis is on the impact of the dominant culture, what the gender roles say to us, what are the biases, stereotypes. The majority of practitioners are clients and women, and clients are women, challenges those previous established assumptions that were incorrect, discusses the multiple layers of oppression, increases multicultural awareness and competence. The theory behind feminist counseling is relational cultural theory. And what that theory says is that relationships and connectedness play a vital role in the lives of women and are seen as a pathway to health and wellness. Women's identity and self-concept develop through the context of these relationships. And therapists aim to emphasize the quality of relationships and be present with their suffering. Lessening the suffering by fostering resilience, empathy, mutual empathy, empowering your client, fostering social justice. They're really looking at the empowerment of the relationship, how we are connected and interact with others as women. That's a central concept to this theory. Empowering and understanding what amazing person, how resilient your client is, having that mutual empathy and understanding the impact of culture on them is part of this theory. And these principles are what make it up. These are the principles of feminist therapy. The first one is personal is political and critical consciousness. Females have been marginalized, oppressed, and stereotyped. The principle is based on the assumption that the personal or individual problems that come into counseling do originate from that, from political and social context, from the impact of that on us. Earlier in this lecture, I talked about the impact of the sexualization of women on TV, etc., and even going all the way back to the housewife and being happy and or taking an antidepressant and like cleaning the house. So these little things that we often don't realize, much like the Band-Aids with race. Band-Aids were often a white skin color, right? And they didn't make Band-Aids in any other tone of skin. They were all a regular white skin tone. Those kinds of things that people don't think about that are not maybe women or marginalized populations or other races or whatever. There are these microaggressions that occur all the time. And I'm a lot more aware of them now because I am a professor and I learn about it. I still am not aware at times and still maybe even am someone who says a microaggression, unfortunately, without meaning to, because sometimes things come out of our mouths and we've just heard it all our life and we don't even know what it means. Sometimes we don't think about the context. So the impact of this is the impact on everyone, and it's really important to understand that as a central principle of feminist psychology. The next one is commitment to social change. As a therapist and as a feminist psychologist, you would not only aim for the individual to change, but for your client to be wanting social change, empowering them to do social justice work, empowering them to speak out, empowering them to speak out about oppression. There is a profound commitment to change not only the individual, but also societal issues. There are different definitions of distress and mental illness. Remember in our history with women with hysteria, like Freud said she's hysterical. Women are dramatic, they're hysterical. Those are all aggressive comments that are biased and untrue. And so we were, as women, we were put into categories as being mentally ill. And really, psychological distress is what it is. We're distressed from the impact of all the political and social issues that have oppressed us through our lives. For example, a client who's a survivor of sexual abuse may be disassociating, which is a coping mechanism. They're not mentally ill, like they have done something wrong. And so I do have a ton of this with my own clients. Say, hey, look, this is a symptom of what happened, and this is something we can deal with. This is something we can treat. And in fact, you can be well and meet your treatment goals. The relationship is egalitarian, of course. And we talk about that power differential because you want to make sure that client feels that you are equal and egalitarian. You are together. All types of oppression are recognized. Women are valued. Women are, you're catapulted up to say, look at you, look at what you've done, look at what you've gone through. And not just women, but anyone. I mean, we're using women as an example, but if you had an LGBTQ plus client or someone of another race or ethnicity or background, you could use all of these principles with that client. And you can also use this with men because no matter, yes, most of us have been oppressed, but many men go through trauma and things in their lives that we can use these same principles with. So just making sure you don't pigeonhole yourself in just women. This can go for just white women. It can go for anyone. I think sometimes you do notice, I think that majority of the theorists were white women. And there is one, Espen, who's Cuban. I know that's evolved since then, and there are more diversity in this theory, but just that is kind of how it was created. So there is probably some bias with that too. You can always critique each one of these for sure. So therapeutic goals. What are the goals of this theory? There's a list on page 345, but the goal is really affirming a value, helping that client to see that they are equal, that they are valuable and important, but also education about the gender role socialization process. A lot of times, like I said, we're not aware of the gender role socialization process. There are, microaggressions that I hear constantly. Perhaps in a meeting one time recently in church, um, they talked about with the husband's job and all the different jobs for the husband and never mentioned the wife. And I almost stood up and said something. Also, Saturday morning, guys, football, and then the ladies in the church are going to do our art project. And so I'm not anti that men shouldn't have their guy time and girls shouldn't have their girl time. I'm not, but to actually just put everyone in a box and say, oh, you would want to do this because you're a girl. I actually hate arts and crafts, and I'd much rather go to the football party. So, um, it's a little off-putting to me that I get put in a category just because I'm female, and that goes with any kind of population, right? You put me there because you stereotype me that I want to go paint a door thing. Okay, that sounds miserable to me, but anyway. We have all identified internalized messages, and we want to replace them with more self-enhancing beliefs. You want your clients to understand the sexist and oppressive societal beliefs and practice, and that influence and how that influences people in negative ways. Just think back to Harvey Weinstein, and to this Jeffrey Epstein. Look at these, powerful people in Hollywood making women have sex with them for roles. And that was par for the course. Nobody turned them in. They were too scared. And look at everything with this Jeffrey Epstein and all the money and influence and sex trafficking going on there. And we're going to talk about that in class. But man, that was going on in all of our lives. That was just a couple of years ago that all of this has come to light. With all the multiple people that Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed and raped, and because he had power and influence as a white male. So it's a great time to talk about all of this and the Me Too movement, but all of those things were going on behind closed doors, and people weren't talking about it. And if they did talk about it, they were shamed and called names as women. And what kind of impact has that had on all of us as women? And not just women, but all marginalized populations. What kind of what is that telling us, right? And everything right now, with George Floyd and all of the ways that the African American population has been treated by the dominant culture in so many ways. So this is, if you think about these therapeutic goals, these all go in flux with all of that as well, because they're very similar. Acquire skills to bring about change in the environment. How do you help your client to be more outgoing, more open, more stronger inside themselves, build self-efficacy and understanding and bring about change? How do they address it? Help to restructure institutions to rid of discriminatory practices. There are plenty of those discriminatory practices. Look at all the different businesses and stories that have come to light in the past 7 months to 3 years with race and gender. Develop a wide and LGBT Q plus as well. I mean, I'm sure I'm leaving something out, but I think everybody understands what I mean. And develop a wide range of behaviors that are freely chosen. How do you want to behave? What can you do? What's your freely choose your path? You evaluate the impact of social factors on your life and also internally for yourself. Develop a sense of power. Recognize the power of relationships and connectedness, and trust your own experience and intuition. So the client experience actually can be anybody. So I want to make sure that you know that. This technique is highly active. You're joining with your client to attempt to meet those goals. It can be with anyone, but the main goal is to help people understand they are equal, no matter what is their background, their race, sexual orientation, their gender. And we help those people to feel empowered and strong in who they are and not feel ashamed about who they are. And that is the main goal and it can be for anyone. Let's read the case of Alma together. Please read the case of Alma for class. We will talk about this on page 349 when we come back together and do our experiential learning on Thursday. And we're going to talk about, writing a note, all the things we're going to talk about. Get back together and have some fun. And there's actual techniques that you use, and they're in your text. So, of course, the heart of this is empowerment. We want to empower our clients. We want to help them to feel empowered so they do not feel powerless anymore. Interrupting the trance of powerlessness. You can tell mine's been interrupted. Sure. Self-disclosure. It's so good to self-disclose to clients in these theories. In the old ones, it was a big no-no. We certainly don't want you to self-disclose when you're in your early stages because we want you to feel really good at skills, et cetera, and not make it about you. But self-disclosure can really help a client to feel normal and not crazy. And hey, I'm a therapist and I still have issues, that kind of stuff. So I'm always really open with my clients about that I am not perfect and that I give them specific examples if it pertains to them. I don't make it about me. Gender role and social identity analysis is where you assist clients in identifying the impact that their own gender role socialization has played in shaping their values, thoughts, and behaviors. Alma, who identified as a female, a lesbian, and a Dominican, all marginalized identities within the dominant culture. So you would talk about the messages that Alma received. So we're going to talk about Alma when we go back to class. Then we have bibliotherapy, which is reading and empowerment by reading books and women who've been women or other populations who have asserted power and become empowered. And we help people to be assertive. We train them to be assertive. We reframe and relabel what they have internalized and reframe a shift in blaming the victim to society. Helping to put it on political and social instead of internally on themselves. Relabel to their behavior. She's strong and healthy instead of selfish and masculine. So we're going to reframe. We're going to look at that like, awesome woman. You are so powerful and strong and good for you instead of something that you should be ashamed of because you're strong and powerful or you're masculine or you're not feminine enough or whatever. You know, whatever it is, we're empowering you that you're you. And turning that work into social action. Group work is also really important for this. In gender role analysis, you identify various gender role messages experienced during the client's lifetime, and you help identify positive and negative consequences of those messages. So right here, there's a list of how you do it underneath, and I want you to know how to do it because this is how you would actually, these are factual techniques you would use interventions. Identify statements the clients make to themselves based on the message, like I'm shameful, I'm not good enough, that kind of stuff. And what message do they want to change? What do they want to keep? And then you have a plan. How are you going to do that? It's collaborative, egalitarian, and then we have the example of Alma. Here is the role of men. Okay? Men can be feminist therapists and can be practiced on male clients. Male therapists are willing to understand their own privilege. They confront their own sexist behavior in themselves and others and work toward equal relationships and support women's efforts. So there's the answer. I believe that is maybe an answer to a question that you may have. Social pressure for masculine features can be restricting achievement, restricted emotionality, overvaluing power and control. And they would work through that in therapy to have a more authentic life. So it's a beautiful, I use feminist with a lot of my male clients. It's fantastic. They don't know I'm using it, but I mean, I ask questions and talk about gender roles with them a lot. And it's nice because it's coming from Dr. Beale, who's a woman. And I think that often when I ask them questions like, well, what would have happened if she did that? It's powerful for them to think about. I got away with this because I'm a dude, right? I mean, people are okay with my behavior. Multicultural competencies. We are aware of our own assumptions, values, and biases. You want to understand the world is culturally diverse and have appropriate interventions for clients. Of course, like some of those things would not be okay for some of our clients, depending on where they were from, right? You'd have to be careful and make sure that you are
aligned with them. And there's some multicultural consideration questions, and then the case of Gwen, and we'll do the case of Queen when we get back and talk about all of these things on Thursday.